We have a lot of people attending today, and definitely you guys can be asking questions. We are going to discuss today a very, very important topic, which has to do with the CARES Act that was recently became law this past Friday. I know that many of you joined us also over the weekend, that we went through some of the guidelines of the CARES Act, but today we are going to get into a bit more depth and discuss with you any questions that you might have, and also identify appropriate provisions that might be useful for you. And for this reason, we have invited to be with us Bob Kowalik. Bob is a very good friend, and he is the owner. He's a physical therapist, first of all, but he is the owner of comprehensive, what's the whole title? Just give me the title, Bob. Comprehensive, the title of the company.
All right, Certified Reimbursement Solutions.
Certified Reimbursement Solutions, yes. Bob, I am going to turn it over to you and just give us an overview. The CARES Act includes a lot of different things, right? It includes components about even Medicare. It includes, I was reading some details, it includes even donations to non-profit organizations, okay? It includes a lot of different things, tax credits and all that. But let's discuss what are the most important things that would be really applicable to specifically physical therapy private practices. How a physical therapy private practice can take advantage of the CARES Act.
Okay, well, first of all, thanks for doing this. These kinds of meetings are, I think, invaluable, today. And just so that this, this was an act that was passed into law on Friday. I don't know that there is any person in the entire United States right now that could answer every single question there is definitively, because it's everyone is still frantically trying to digest it all. It is a huge piece of legislation. I have been focused on studying and trying to understand the practical application for the loan amounts that are available under it, a little bit on some of the Medicare tweaks. As far as tax and all this other kind of stuff and real estate and all, there's just so many things in it. Those are not things that that I should be speaking about, but I can share with you my understanding based on reading this for way too many hours. I literally have read it over and over and over for the last 2.5 days. I have had meetings with attorneys who are responsible in their law firms for translating it, for their own client application. Let's hit the Medicare, one significant Medicare change right up front. And I'm not suggesting that this is something that anyone should do. Just understand too, just disclaimer that I'm not an attorney, I'm not a CPA, so don't take this as legal or financial advice. It's just trying to share an understanding of something that does impact us all. So Medicare has come out and said that they will give everyone in advance equal to 3 months of your normal Medicare reimbursement rate. So that came out in the law, and it is something to consider. I believe that everybody should be doing financial cash flow projections and any kind of influx of revenue is important to have in there. The real question that needs to be answered is, at what point does anyone run out of cash? So just know that there is, and we can provide a link, there is a PDF that CMS put out that gives you kind of the how-to walkthrough on the steps and where to go and how to get the form for applying and all that kind of stuff. And I'll share that that link in the chat in a few minutes here. But so whatever your normal monthly revenue for Medicare is, they're willing to give you an advance of 3 months worth of that for a Part B provider. Now, it's not free money. It would be withheld, you know, starting, I believe it says in 120 days from the time that you were to receive the money. So at that point, then there is a gradual take back, and it's not completely clear as to what that rate of take back is, if it's applied against 100% of their payments or some percentage of that. So that kind of remains to be seen, but just know that there's a potential influx of cash related to CMS of 3 times your normal Medicare revenue. That's completely, it's part of the CARES Act, but separate from any kind of loans or, you know, the loan component of this that is available there as well. The big part of this legislation is called the Payroll Protection Program. So that's how they've labeled the loan. And there's 3 pieces of the loan. The first part is determining how much money is available. The requirements are essentially any company that's under 500 employees. So I would assume that that's the vast majority of, you know, of PT private practice. It's almost impossible to not be eligible for the loan. So it's under 500 employees. Here we go. Here's some data. And you basically have to have been in business on February 15th and had payroll and payroll expense and paid payroll tax. And as long as you're not under any kind of scenario where none of us want to be, then you would be eligible for this. And it's intended to, it's really an amendment of the Section 7 SBA loans. And so it falls under SBA, but it's a different kind of loan than their typical SBA loans that were available up until this time. So the distribution of it, though, is not going to be limited to just SBA approved lenders. So almost any FDIC bank should be able to work with you know, people on borrowing money under this act. But I just suggest that you all contact your banks and start asking the questions about, are they up to speed on it? Right now, I don't believe any bank's up to speed on it. I don't believe any bank's ready to loan money, but they're scrambling very quickly to try to, you know, put all of this in place. So there's 3 pieces of it. There's how much could you borrow? There's what do you get to use the money for? And how much of it do you need to pay back? So in a nutshell, the amount you can borrow is determined by your payroll cost, your average payroll cost over the last year on a monthly basis times 2.5. So there's a fairly lengthy or multiple line inclusion of what's considered a payroll cost. But it's pretty much anything related to, you know, paying people. So that's your payroll taxes, et cetera. So you take your total average for the last year on a monthly basis times 2.5, and that goes into what you're able to borrow. The other piece of this is, if you already took out an SBA loan for the purpose of essentially helping you with cash flow under this crisis, you can flip that loan essentially into this, and this will pay off that loan. And then this loan will become the loan that you have. And I would suggest that that makes sense based on my understanding of this, because this has the potential for forgiveness of the loan, whereas a normal SBA loan does not. So take 2.5 times normal month, multiply it by, 2.5 times your normal payroll cost, add to it an SBA loan principal balance if you have that. That's the maximum amount you can borrow, up to $10 million. If that total, which I believe for vast majority of us would be true, is $1 million or less, those loans are going to be expedited. So by expedited, who knows what that means, but I know that they're trying to provide this assistance as timely as humanly possible. So within days, within a week, you know, that kind of time frame, not 2 months, 3 months, which would kind of be a normal time frame for SBA. So now you have amount of money that you have borrowed. Let me just also say that there's no guarantees, no collateral. All of the things that would normally apply to a typical bank loan or SBA loan, they're not included in this. You literally can't be refused as long as you have a business that was in operation on February 15th and you've been negatively impacted by COVID-19, and that's just about everybody. So now what can you use the money for? So there's a thing called allowable uses, and you can use the money for payroll costs, same definition of what went into the determination of the loan amount. You can also use the money for rent. For if you are a practice owner who owns your building and you're paying a mortgage through your company, instead of rent, you can deduct, or you can use it for the interest payment. Excuse me one second. Sorry, I am working from home like everybody else. I am in a mandatory shelter-in-place state, and my 80-pound Labrador is trying to chew on a bone right below my feet here, so sorry about that. I took it away from her. She's probably gonna start barking at me now. Anyway, so you can use it for your payroll costs, you can use it for rent payment, you can use it for utilities, and you can use it for interest payment, the part of that you might be paying and related to interest on a mortgage. And you use the time period of the average of a year before to calculate what you can borrow, but you use an 8-week period following the date of the loan for the spend. Okay, so that's your usable amount. And the next area, which Dimi has up here, is forgiveness on the loan. So forgiveness is a comparison, a pre and post comparison of two components, FTE and wage amount. Okay, so you have to do comparisons within specifically defined time frames, and you want to, the higher percentage of your FTE that you are maintaining on June 30th as compared to the pre-loan period of time, which you have two options on. One loan period, or one comparison period, is at your option, February 15th, 2019 to June 30th, 2019, or January 1st, 2020 through the end of February 2020. So you get to pick which one of those, and you should do the calculations for each so that you can pick the one that works to your advantage the best. So you're going to compare on June 30th how many FTs you have to those date ranges, and if you're essentially the same, then there's no reduction with respect to forgiveness. The second part, and it's both apply, not one or the other, but both. If your wages, but now the wages is calculated on an individual person basis, different than FTE, which is aggregate FTE for your practice. So for every person, you have to do a calculation of pay before and pay after. Now on the wage piece, there's a little difference, and that is you're going to compare your before period is now the most recent completed quarter, not the February 15th to June. It's the most recent completed quarter. So you're going to compare that to your wages that you're being paid on a kind of a per pay period run rate. as of through this 8-week period, after borrowing the money, and you have a little buffer of 25% of what people are paid. So if somebody's paid 80%, 90%, anything 75% or over, there's no reduction in the forgivable amount. So you take those two components, apply that to the borrowed amount, or the spend amount during that 8 weeks, and that determines how much of it is forgivable. And once it's forgiven, it's forgiven. So essentially at that point, you were allowed to borrow money you didn't have to pay back. So I think the practical application of this, part of it is being able to understand and look forward and predict what your forgivable amounts are going to be. And borrowing the forgivable amount is pretty much a no-brainer. It's whether or not borrowing any more than the forgivable amount is going to make sense, because essentially then it is a debt obligation that's a low interest loan at no more than 4% interest that would be paid back on a 10-year amortization, with a deferment on the initial payments of somewhere between 6 months and a year, depending upon the bank. So that is kind of the synopsis of the payroll protection program under it. I believe it is a real lifeline to us. If you have already cut your payroll, lowered FTEs, lowered wage, you are given a grace period essentially to bring that back up so that you're not going to be penalized on the forgiveness. I do believe that there is confusion in it, that it's not perfectly clear. There will be guidance coming out in the coming days, and there probably will be technical corrections. They threw a whole lot together here in a very short period of time, and it's not perfect. One of the big holes is if you're an LLC, for example, you're a managing member as an owner, you're not paid a salary on a W-2 basis. That scenario wasn't really directly considered in this, but you could assume that it wasn't intended to leave the business owner out, because technically then you're talking about business owners that are going to borrow money to keep paying people to work less than normal, yet there's nothing in it for them. That makes no sense. So there are nuances and things that need to be ironed out, but by and large, the forgivable amount of the loans is at that point becomes free money and will significantly help cash flow. The intention of it all is to keep people working, to keep people paid, not through unemployment. Unemployment's a percentage of what you were paid. This will pay somebody 100% of what they're paid, and it could be forgivable depending upon what you do with staffing. So that is the off the top of my head important parts of this to keep in mind. Probably a good time to pause and see what kind of questions that generates.
Yeah. Bob, there are several questions here. Even people in anticipation of this have been emailing to me a ton of questions, but let me just discuss some of these. One of the questions is, for the payroll costs over the past year, does that mean January, December 19 or March 19 to March 2020?
So for the loan amount, you have to talk.
For the loan amount, I think he means for the loan amount.
Yeah. So for the loan amount, it's the average for the entire year. Now, if you weren't in business for the entire year, then it's a condensed period of time, essentially, for this year, the first 2 months of this year, that could be used. So.
Okay, and those of you who need the handout that we were just showing earlier on your screens, that handout has been placed in the chat section, and you can get it from there. What is this $100,000 salary limit? What is this all about?
Yeah, so they're basically saying we're not going to let you use for the loan amount or for the spend amount a salary or a compensation to any one individual greater than $100,000 a year. So they're limiting it to that. Now, this is in the area of the gray area of a little bit of confusion. So, for example, let's say you're a business owner, you're paying yourself $180,000 a year, for example. You're paying yourself $15,000 a month. And you're, that's not W-2. You know, let's say it's K-1. Our translation of this, and again, this is the kind of thing that you need to get your own clarification on, is that you could use that as part of your loan amount calculation. But because people who make over $100,000 a year are excluded from the forgiveness side of the equation, that you wouldn't need to use them on that side. That combination is advantageous. And I believe that's probably how they intend to make sure that the business owner there's something in it for them here, so that there would be money made available for you to pay yourself in the allowable use, because you included your pay amount. Now there's probably going to be some kind of technical corrections that might limit that dollar amount or whatever coming, but at least you're in a position to have some loan amount to pay yourself without then, if you're paying yourself less than what you used to, without being penalized for that. So that's why the $100,000 limit, I believe, is in there, because it really prevents stuff from negatively impacting around what owners would be doing differently than employees.
Understood. Another question is, when we go to the forgivable portion, okay, is it only the payroll part of the forgivable portion, or you can include your rents, utilities, mortgage payments, and all that stuff as part of the forgivable option?
So the forgivable amount is based on the allowable use. So it's based on the spend. So since you can spend on payroll cost, rent, utilities, and interest on a mortgage payment, that determines how much of the loan could be forgivable based on the ratios of FTE and wage before and after.
So hypothetically speaking, let me use an example here. Let's say that the average payroll, let's say monthly payroll for a company during 2019 was $100,000 a month. Okay, I'm using this round number.
Okay.
So based on that, this company would be able to borrow $250,000.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say now that this company uses this money for payroll, rents and leases, mortgage, utilities, payroll expense, let's say, let's Social Security or payroll taxes, stuff like that. And let's suppose that they have the same FTEs in that period of June 30th from, what is the initiation period? June 30th is the end. What's the beginning of the measurement?
Yeah, so on the future side, it's June 30th.
June 30th.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say on June 30th, their FTE is the same as it was either on January, February of 2020 or February, June 2019, depending which measurement they're going to use. And let's say that their differential in wage is within 25% margin. This means that the entire, then almost the entire 250,000 can be forgiven.
Yeah, the entirety of the allowable use spend would be forgiven. So because you're using a 2.5x multiplier on the loan amount and essentially spending on an 8-week period, so it's the spend over the 8 weeks following the loan. So it's whatever you spend in that 8 weeks is what is on the table for being forgiven. The question is, is 2.5 times my payroll cost for the last year's average, going to be more or less than 2 times my monthly spend in the 8 weeks following the loan on payroll, rent, utilities, and mortgage interest. So I think somebody probably did a whole bunch of just normal math on that and determined that it probably should cover it, but it's not. Don't just assume that it covers. You actually have to do the math. So I'm actually very, very close to being finished with building the math model that everybody would need to use or could use, input their inputs, and then get what the loan amount could be, what the forgivable amount could be, what the comparisons are. It's a monster of an Excel workbook, but it's almost done. And we can talk about that too, as as a way to help you figure out the cash flow on this.
Thank you, Bob. I have a series of questions that were emailed to me by Gregory, and I will put those questions on the screen so we can read them together. He says, as an owner physical therapist and having a salary of over 100K, are you eligible to get loan forgiveness from Paycheck Protection Program loan of up to 100,000 of your salary, or you're not eligible at all because your salary is over 100,000?
So it depends if you're, what kind of, how you're incorporated, right? Are you, if you're a sub S and you're in your payroll as, and you actually are part of payroll expense, that's one thing. And in that scenario, you can't include more than 100,000 of your, so that average monthly, you're capped out at 8333 for what you could go into determining the loan amount. If you're not in payroll expense directly and you're paid through like a guaranteed payment or some other thing that you would get through an LLC or whatever, then it's a gray area as to whether it can be included. I plan on including it. And where it comes into the other side on forgiveness amount, because you're over 100,000, the FTE and wage related to anyone over 100,000 is not included in that calculation. So you get to use it, but it won't work against you because you're limited to the 8333 on the payout.
Okay, good. And is his second question, as an owner of 2 different private practices with 2 separate tax IDs, I think it is obvious that you can apply for separate PPP loans.
I've not read anything specifically that addresses that right on, but it seems logical to say that it's 2 companies.
If you apply for the Paycheck Protection Program loan and your employees are actually working less hours because there is not enough work for them, can and should you still pay them their full regular salary?
Yeah, so the intention of this is that exactly. What the government wants is to provide employers with enough money to keep paying their people at whole during this period of time, so that it stimulates whatever can be stimulated in the economy not being able to go anywhere and do anything. So, I think that, so the idea is that if they've already been reduced, they're going to give you a grace period to bring them back without being penalized for the reduction that had already happened before this even came out.
Yeah. In regards to the next question here, if you can apply for both SBA and the New York City Small Business Continuity Loan Fund, you really have to check with them at the application if the one is exclusive of the other.
Yeah, you can't double dip.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's whether or not that the other loan is part of SBA. I can tell you that you cannot have both an SBA loan and this loan for the same purpose.
Yeah. Kind of same thing will apply, I believe, for number 5. There's a special program in New York City where if you do have less than 5 employees, they give you a grant of 40% of your payroll. Again, I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that you cannot get both things. You cannot get with the same P&Ls numbers for the one and the other.
I can't add to that.
If you have an employee that was part-time, approximately working 10 to 12 hours a week for past year, and he became full-time employee on 3/12/20, working 28 to 30 hours a week, in his new payroll, eligible for loan forgiveness, because based on this language, payroll costs extend the arrangement. So basically there were arrangements. Would his new salary still qualify, or it will be based in his salary prior to 215? I mean, the qualification period is a qualification period. So you will use as qualification period either January, February, or the February to June of 2019.
Yeah, so you have one period that's used to determine how much the loan can be. You have your actual spend period of 8 weeks after getting the loan. And that's where this would come in. Now you've got a salary that's greater now than it used to be. So you're spending. And then you have, you know, the forgiveness comparison. So somebody who's increased in FTE or increased wage helps on forgiveness. It doesn't, you can't get forgiven more than what you could borrow. So you have to kind of just do the math on the before and after. And this is the kind of tool thing that we're building, so that you could actually put the scenarios in and see how it calculates out.
If anybody is on, okay, Facebook Live, when is the start date for the spending we have to do? That is from Scott. When is the start date?
Yeah, it's the immediate 8 weeks following the date of your loan.
Okay, the immediate 8 weeks following the date of the loan, the origination of the loan.
Yes.
Wondering if you had suspended bonus and paid PTO programs, if you retro-pay monies that were earned earlier, could that be forgiven?
Not sure I totally understand the question, but if you didn't pay it out in the last year, I don't think you're going to get to claim that you paid it out by doing it now.
Yeah. When approximately will this Excel program be available so all owners can plug in their own personal numbers? Thanks, by the way, for creating it.
Let me, can I type my email address in the chat?
Yes, absolutely.
So right now, just send me an email if, so that we can reply. So there's some different moving pieces to this. I'm calling it a CARES package, just because it's kind of dorky and sounds good. There's a big monstrosity of a calculator that I'm not going to send out because I'd spend the rest of my life explaining how to use it. What we're doing is we're building a Google form that would be, you know, secured, where you can answer the questions and we'll provide the answers based on the inputs. And there may be a need for a workbook in between the two to help you organize data and information if you don't already have all that kind of stuff in order. And that kind of workbook would be something, you know, we would send out so that you could compile this data. You know, it depends on how structured and organized all of your information is normally, right? I went through and completed the form. It took me 5 minutes because I have all of my data. If you don't have this data, you might need to spend days organizing your information. I'll provide you a structure to organize it in. You know, but then, you know, from there we have to kind of go through the process of doing this as efficiently as possible and correctly as possible. And so the calculator that determines loan amounts, forgiveness amounts, and all that is such a monster. There's so much logic in it. you're talking about a level of Excel use that's not very common to find people that can build this kind of thing. So it would really be a problem answering, you know, the questions related to it. So we're trying to do it in a way that gets everybody the information with the least amount of headache.
Awesome. Also, let me just share something else. I see that we have in the call my very good friend, Rich Orsini also. Him and I and Costas had worked many years ago on issues in physical therapy in New York State. And back then we had created a website, savephysicaltherapy.com. We are using now this website to disseminate all of these webinars and town halls. So if you go to savephysicaltherapy.com, you can register for the future webinars we have. We have, for example, tomorrow night, Tuesday, a webinar on how we are using and how you can be using diagnostics in your practice that can add. We have created a new program with HADS where it can help you add new revenue in your practice within 30 days. Even if your practice is not open right now, still there are ways you can create new revenue within 30 days with what we call outside business. And there's a total new finance plan for that. And also we have on Wednesday night, the billing of telehealth. We're gonna have back both Bob Kowalik as well as Mary DeLong, where they will both address, she will address some compliance issues, and then Bob will address both compliance as well as billing. And the following Wednesday, we're going to have another webinar on marketing your telehealth business. I mean, definitely this is a big future for the profession. This is not going to be just for a few weeks. It's going to take some time, guys, to reestablish practices. And that's why I keep saying every opportunity I have, if you manage right now your practice not to go to zero, but to maintain your practice with mitigation strategies, at least up to a certain level of function. If your income doesn't drop from 100,000 to zero, but if you manage through mitigation strategies to keep it at maybe 30% reduction, 40% reduction at the most, then it's going to be much easier for you to recover in the post-COVID-19 time. Otherwise, when you start from zero, 3-4 months from now, it's going to be very tough to recover as a practice. And you know, and maybe I will be taken wrong with what I'm saying right now, and some people may frown upon me. When somebody asked me the other day, what are you afraid more? Are you afraid about your business, or you're afraid of dying from COVID-19? And I said, you know, I'm a cancer survivor. The chances for me having died back in 2005 when I was dealing with cancer were much higher than dying from COVID-19. I am most worrying about the business, because I can tell you there will be businesses that will just eclipse at this point from the universe of businesses. There are businesses that will have a hard time and they won't be able to survive. And yes, there will be people who will be dying, a lot of people who will be dying, but
let me just piggyback on that for a second.
Yep.
Because somebody who's been deep into math, you know, on this now for days, there are some absolutes, and one absolute is the extent to which you maintain a normal percentage of revenue, the benefit derived from the payroll protection program is greater. The closer you are to normal, the better off this really impacts you. So anything that you can do to keep revenue is important to do. And I know that you have people on one hand and the amount of production available on the other. And there's a big gap now between work available to do and people available to do it. And so what the natural business reaction is to bring the people down to match, right? And what this legislation is designed to do is to bring the money available to bring the people kind of up, right? Even though the production isn't there. And so anything that you can do that adds revenue, this is why if you haven't done telehealth or e-visits, right? It's really virtual services, okay? I understand there's different definitions. Virtual services, e-visit, telehealth, virtual check-ins, different things, different billing, different revenue available. But diagnostics, anything that you can do that creates new revenue streams is super important to do. And I believe, and I can just tell you from my own direct application of this is, we do, revenue cycle process and billing for private practice PT across the country. And as our clients' volume goes down, our volume of work needed to do has been reduced as well. But I plan to keep people. I haven't laid off a single person. I haven't cut anyone's pay yet. I'll use these resources to continue that scenario. And in my situation, where we have less than our normal amount of work to do, but yet there's still a normal amount of pay and compensation going out, I'm going to use that gap to say things that I would like to get done and utilize these people to do that add value to my business over time. That under a normal, we were growing like crazy and super busy. And it's like, when you're in that condition, you don't have time to do all the stuff you'd really like to do. Well, guess what? Now you've got some time able to accomplish some things that otherwise we're going to be challenged to accomplish, and someone else is going to pay you for it. So that's how I'm looking at it. Making the best of it. Think creatively about how you could get value out of your people in a way different than you historically have.
Thank you, Bob. And actually, from our side, Kostas and I are thinking exactly the same way, how we can take advantage of this kind of a little bit downtime to create something even better, something bigger, better organized. There is an interesting point that Christina Panetta is making on live Facebook, which I would like to read it for you, because this is a reality and an issue that we have seen already, and we have heard of it from many private practice owners. Christina says, crazy question. How are you handling support staff that refuse to come to work, but ran out of PTO and have not been laid off? How are you handling? If we lay off and they collect unemployment, 504 in New York per week. Unemployment in New York is $504 in New York, plus the $600 from the government, from federal government per week. That makes it $1,104 per week. They could potentially receive more from unemployment than the support staff has when they are working, or in billing, or in tech services and all that. So in other words, how do you guys handle when the unemployment that somebody brings at home is more than their pay? And that's very interesting, right?
That one.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh boy, this is a very tough one. Look, here is what I believe is very important to give as a message to all of our employees and associates. And I think we have to give this message out to society, okay? Yes, at this point, what happened is that the federal government, in effect, has increased our taxes in the future to pay a couple of $1 trillion to the people and to some corporations, and they will do perhaps more in the near future if needed, okay? This is what has happened. But how long can this possibly last? It can last weeks, months in terms of funding. At some point, you cannot fund something from no production, from nothing happening. This cannot go on, okay? It was not viable It is never viable to have no production or decreased production and keep borrowing money. At some point, you cannot pay it back. So we have to give the idea to our employees and to society that, hey, these are the businesses that in the future they will employ you. These are the businesses that in the future they'll bring the bread and butter in your home, on your table. So thinking only how much money we're going to get in a short term for the next 2, 3, 4 months is not really the answer that we have as a society, or we should have a society.
Yeah.
As a society, we have to be creating right now how we can create a better world tomorrow, how we can make changes to create a better world, a better business. And as a business owners, this is really our obligation. Our obligation as business owners is to make sure that this business stays there, that it continues existing despite all of the situations we're going through right now, and improving it.
I suggest that this is an opportunity to look at whether or not all the people you have are the right people to have. Because, you know, stress, crisis, whatever, take them out on the golf course. People behave, right? You're learning about your people right now under a set of conditions that might show something that causes you to look at them differently. And, you know, the fact is that you need to keep people on your team if you're looking at this source of funding, right? You need the FTE, you need the wage. And if somebody wants to check out because it's a short-term benefit to them to just be unemployed, then you know, there's a lot of people out there that have already been laid off that might not be in a situation where their employer is going to be able to stay open and resume and all that kind of stuff. And so maybe there's the opportunity to trade up.
I have from someone, Bob, a question which I am not really certain about how to answer that, but it's a very good question. He says that if you pay a bookkeeper, if you pay an accountant, if you pay your attorney, right, and you send them a check or you pay them through a credit card or whatever, can that payment to them, which is income for them, it's a 1099 income, it's a 1099 expense to you and a 1099 income to them, can that count towards the forgiven part of the loan?
Yeah, so this is something we've looked a lot at and I've debated a lot with my attorney. The way it's written right now is it clearly intends to cover people who as individuals are being paid as 1099s. With the same limitation of $100,000 pay rate per year. Okay, so if it's a person getting a 1099 for you, from you, like a contract therapist instead of an employed therapist, you can count that in your loan amount. You can count that in your spend, and it does go into the calculation. Where it's really a gray area is paying a company a 1099. That's the situation I'm in. Right? I mean, we are independent contractors. We essentially replace labor, right? People don't need to have people on their staff because they have us and they pay us on a 1099. But I'm not being paid as an individual to do that. I'm being paid as a company to do that. And that's where it's a little bit confusing because the logic is that if my client was to get forgiveness on that cost, I'm getting forgiveness on that cost. Two people are getting forgiveness for the same cost, and so that's where it's a little bit gray. And I think there'll be guidance and clarification and corrections probably coming out on the explanation for that. But it is clear today that individuals paid under 1099 do count.
Good. And there was also another question which I think we can answer, that the question is, if the salaries are the same, but the person is different, does that still count? Let's say you were hiring John and now you had fired John, but you hired Mary.
You know, it's another little gap in the way that it's written, but I believe, you know, go back to the intention. What is really driving this? It's to keep people employed and keep them paid. And then they just want to make sure that you're not cutting a lot of people, right? That's the intention. So if Mary left and John was hired, and it's an FTE that's been replaced and there's wage being sent out, I think you're going to end up being able to count all that.
I don't know, guys, about you, but when I see the video cam from Chahi Niv, I don't know if you can see Chahi Niv's with this amazing doggy there that he has on the picture. Maybe you can scroll right or left in the hey, hi. Chahi, that's the picture we really want to be looking at, your doggy there, which is amazing. That's awesome. That's how I want to be right now. All right. Any more questions?
Well, I have kind of I know we're wrapping up, but maybe this is a parting thought. And back in with the concept of preserving revenue, right? You have new revenue stream opportunities, but you also need to consider how you're keeping. We're all in a business where we treated somebody today, but we're going to get paid for it a month from now. And so as soon as a claim goes out, it's now accounts receivables. And don't make the mistake of taking your billing resources and cutting that back, because the time per dollar investment in converting accounts receivables to cash when there's no current money going out is exponentially greater. So you're going to have to increase time investment in managing AR to convert your AR to cash at the same rate that you used to. So just as you're looking at how to play all this forward, you have to look at conservation of cash and conversion of accounts receivables to cash at the highest rate possible during this period of time where your production is down. And that's an opportunity where we might be able to help somebody. If you've unplugged or disconnected from your ability to really convert AR to cash, we might be able to help you out with that.
Bob, please post one more time your email for people who may wish to reach out to you. Bob is doing a phenomenal job in the area of billing and collections, and he has been helping lots of physical therapists, and the fact that he is a physical therapist himself really makes a big difference. Okay, if there are no other comments or questions, we will say goodbye for now, and we're going to be here every day until nobody shows up. And I hope you guys find this helpful. And Bob, thank you so much for doing this and for helping us. And then Bob, Wednesday, you're going to be speaking on the billing of telehealth. So you guys can register on that.
I wrote it down. Thank you, Dean.
Okay. Take care, guys.
Going on. This is awesome. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.